You're listening to the Packernet Podcast Network.
What's going on, U.S. Cellular customers? I've got good news, so don't hit skip, at least not yet. I'm talking about their special customer event, Us Days. What is Us Days? It means exclusive offers just for their customers, just to say thanks, like $1,200 off any phone, plus $300 off any tablet. No, I didn't just misread that. They must really like you. Us Days at U.S. Cellular, exclusive offers just for you, just to say thank you. Right now, U.S. Cellular customers get $1,200 off any phone, plus $300 off any tablet. Terms apply.
With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident panelist, as always, Ryan Schlip. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_data. Well, today, as promised, we're going to go over the Packers general manager, Brian Gutekunst's full interview. Compliments of Cheesehead TV, who were able to get him for a short little sit-down, little one-on-one. And I figured we should go through it. Anytime we get to hear from a coach, a GM, a player, or whatever, especially in the dead period, it's good to give it a listen, see where we're at. So we should probably start with this. I don't want to go over like news and notesy type stuff like yesterday and then end up realizing that takes longer than expected and then we don't have time for the interview. You try to save the best for last, but sometimes the best doesn't fit in the show anymore, so then you have problems. So we're having dessert first today. So why don't we dive into it? We're going to skip down a little bit. There's some pleasantries, obviously, in the beginning. How you doing? Is waiting for training camp hard? Do you worry about off-season incidents? He essentially says, we have a good group of guys, so I'm not really concerned about it. Off-season incidents essentially meaning guys get this little bit of time to get away. Some of them go and train some more. Some of them take that time to legitimately go and decompress and do whatever it is they're going to do before the season, and this is where some people end up getting themselves in trouble. The Packers have been pretty good about not being on that list, although occasionally it does happen. But again, essentially he says, no, I'm not really concerned. But skipping ahead a little bit, the question is, how are the rookies looking compared to the veterans?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the thing that I always look for during this time of year is, how they're fitting in, how they're learning. I think you got to be careful of the evaluation process during the spring, only because everything is so new to these guys. At the same time, you're always kind of keeping an eye. Do they look like the guys we thought they were prior to the selections? And then we signed some guys after the draft, and these guys have fit in really, really well. Not only athletically and what the coaches are asking these guys to do, but then I think just from a culture fit. And again, it's early. They're still getting used to the way we do things around here, but there's a lot of buy-in. I think that goes, a lot of credit to our coaching staff, but then also our current players, and the way they embrace these guys coming in. So again, this is it's a work time. It's a time to get better, get that foundation laid for this season. And they've done a good job so far. And I think we're excited to get to training camp into the season.
It is interesting to hear him kind of talk about, we bring him in and make sure that these are the guys that we thought we were getting. And it's a sigh of relief when they are. But that does have to be somewhat frightening. You spend all this time watching them on tape, and as far as their abilities go, and then on top of that is their personality and who they portray to be. The last thing you want, and I'm sure it's happened to everybody, is they get in the building and they're a completely different person, right? They're just not either fitting in, or you watch them out on the field and you're just like, what is that? It's like that scene from The Office when Michael selects Stanley to be a part of the basketball team because he's black, and so he just assumes he's great, and he watches him try to dribble, and he's like, what? You assume these guys are going to be great, and then you watch them on the field, and you're just like, oh no, what did I do? But sounds like everything so far is so good, but obviously there's very little that can be gleaned so far. The next question, Nagler kind of points out the decline in undrafted free agents, essentially getting cut almost in half. Just kind of trying to get his thoughts on why, and if that's maybe a concern or just the way things were.
Yeah, and I think it's really the way the numbers shook out this year more than anything. Undrafted free agency is a very big part of our roster building, philosophy. We've had a lot of great success with it in years past. Some significant players have come from that group, as you guys know. So I think, our numbers were higher going into the draft this year than they normally are. And it's a good problem to have because there was none of those guys that we were really looking to move on from. There were guys we really liked, wanted to continue to develop. So, and I do think the overall volume in this year's draft class, when you include the undrafted free agents, was a little less maybe in some years. I think it has a little bit to do with the COVID years and the transfer portal. And I think we'll see those numbers spike in the next couple of years. But I think it had a little bit to do with that, so I was a little bit more comfortable with it. At the same time, I really like some of the guys we acquired, and I certainly expect them to push to make the team and help this team moving forward.
And that's something that's been talked about before. We talked about that kind of going into this with the whole COVID exception year with the transfer portal stuff. There's and NIL is another big one. Incentives to stay, which I think a lot of people think is a good thing. I know prior to all these things, there's been a lot of talk about, man, these guys keep getting talked into coming into the NFL and they're just not ready, and it's ruining them. They keep getting oversold. You're going to be a third-round pick or whatever. They go undrafted. They don't make it, and their dream is crushed when they should have just gone back another year. So I think ultimately this will end up being a good thing. They got to come out sometime, so it's going to catch up. But in the meantime, there seems to be a dearth of a sort of severe lack of people wanting to flood the NFL. So there's just smaller numbers across the board as far as people the Packers, have on their board, essentially, that they didn't just take off and say this is not worth exploring. I think the natural next question would be, well, why wouldn't you just take a swing anyways? I mean, even if he's not on your board, just go grab guys. And I think the first part of the answer is probably why. When you look at the amount of guys that we have that we really like and that we want to keep and we want to invest time in, we didn't want to invest time and resources into those just go grab anybody guys and take away from the guys that we have in the building that we genuinely want to take a look at, we genuinely want to help develop, etc. Next question, essentially, heavy hand on defense, similar to last year with offense. Was that done consciously on purpose, or was it just kind of how the draft fell?
Yeah, a little bit how the draft fell for us, but at the same time, I do think, I think if there's anything over that Matt and I together, as we've worked through this thing, have learned is that we have to create opportunities for young players to play. Certainly there's a lot of getting better through practice and preseason, but guys got to go out there in the National Football League and play to get better. And I think you do have to live through some of that stuff if you want to get the best out of those players. So I think, and the salary cap, I think, also plays a part in that, and how every team kind of has to construct it. I mean, the young players are going to have to play, and they're going to have to take on pretty big roles for you. And I think certainly last year it worked out and at the end in some really nice ways. And we'll expect these young guys to kind of come in and put in the same kind of work that those guys did last year, and hopefully see some of those fruits of their labor down the road.
First of all, it is interesting. Interesting question and answer. Obviously, as Packer fans, we know. Let me put it this way: I think we should begin to look at the foundation of the philosophy being not only draft and develop a best player available, but it's just the foundation, right? That isn't to say that you don't build on top of that. You don't just lay the concrete and say, okay, we're done. It is interesting to hear him say that he and Matt LaFleur had gotten together and realized the importance of young people playing, because by golly, fans have been screaming about that forever. I don't know how long. I mean, it feels like, at least since I started this podcast, we as fans have been talking about, man, you got to give these guys opportunities. And the old way of thinking seemed to be with Ted, and who knows how far back it goes, let them sit on the sideline and develop and marinate over there. And if they can, we'll try them on the field. And if they can't, then we won't. I mean, we've been talking about this as early as, 2022? This idea that there's too much fear among the coaches, seemingly. Matt LaFleur and, Pettin and Barry. I remember Pettin in particular, but that extended to Barry. At least when we had these conversations about, like guys like Dean Lowry. And it's not to say we necessarily had better options, but I remember we went out and got Snacks Harrison and we didn't want to use him because, well, he doesn't know the system yet. And there was just this intense fear of putting people out there that might be more talented but don't necessarily know exactly what I'm telling them to do, in contrast with, let's put this talented guy out there and let him make mistakes. It's almost like that helicopter parent that doesn't want their kid to make mistakes. I didn't have a helicopter parent. I didn't have helicopter parents, but I did have a dad that was very just, let me do it. Let me do it. And I'm trying not to be that one myself, but that instinct to just be like, no, wrong. Come on, get out of here. You got to let these guys go. You got to have the fortitude and the strength to be able to go out and let guys go out and make mistakes. And you see the rapid growth, right? I mean, Christian Watson, it was ugly. Jordan Love, it was ugly. A lot of guys, they go out there and it just doesn't look good. And then what the heck is that? Christian Watson burst onto the scene. Jordan Love burst onto the scene. And that's not going to be everybody. But the bottom line is, how long has Jordan Love been on the sideline marinating? Who knows? Maybe we put him out there year one. He would have been ready year one. I don't know. But I also think if you let him marinate for 10 years, I think you put him out there, he still struggles. Because you have to get on the turf. You have to touch grass. You got to throw a football around and have defenders trying to kill you, running at you, and the calls coming in your helmet and the screaming fans and all this craziness and can you trust that receiver who's not running the right routes, and do you have the eye discipline to look there even though you don't want to? You just want to force the ball to Christian because you got a relationship, or Dobbs or whatever. I mean, it's just all the little things that don't happen in practice that you got to fight through on a football field. You got to put bad tape out there so your coaches can see it. You can go back and correct it. And I'm very happy to hear that Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur have identified that. First of all, and honestly, I don't think they ever would have identified it. I think we were just in a situation where we had no option but to throw young guys out there because that's all we had. And even at first, we didn't want to. It's like, no, put Lazard out there. Lazard's the guy. He has to be the guy. Just always throw to Lazard. Don't look at these other guys, please. There was not enough guys for them to hide our rookies. And, I primarily put that on the coaching staff, although I'm sure the GM is in some level of alignment with that. But the coaches just seem terrified. And it's somewhat understandable. The amount of time that you put into this, you think, first of all, that you're the one doing it, when in reality, I think coaches need to do a better job of having a reality check, realizing, there is some level of coaching and player symbiosis. You need both. But I think they control more than they do. All right, it's kind of like, I'd mentioned before, a lot of times one of the mistakes that gets made is believing too much in your coach's ability to fix guys, right, when it comes to like the draft. You look at a guy with raw ability and you overlook the deficiencies because, we'll fix that. And a lot of times there's no fixing that. Or you just don't have the right personnel to actually do it. But anyways, they feel like they're the ones doing it. And if I put together this frickin' game plan and I need it to work and I'm putting you out there and you don't know what you're doing and you're not executing right, I'm going to have an absolute frickin' aneurysm. I'm going to have a heart attack here. I need this to work and I can't have you out there messing stuff up. Sit down and let me put somebody out there that knows what they're doing. And the guy will run the right route, but he's not going to get open because he sucks. But hey, he ran the right route, so we're good. You drafted these guys as playmakers, right? Alan Lazard is a fill-in. No offense to Alan Lazard. I mean, he was good enough, but he's not the kind of guy that you want to keep forever. So you draft guys that you want to be your forever guys like Christian. And maybe even Romeo, who's kind of a middle round guy. So let him be those guys. Let him be those guys. And so, again, I think that they learned that. And it's good that they did. I mean, it's gonna mean there's gonna be growing pains and there's gonna be mistakes, but I'm glad that they're willing to throw guys out there because it's, what else do we draft them for? You can't. I'm not saying there isn't some benefit to maybe waiting in certain situations, but you can't wait for 100%. You can't wait for them to fully get it, or they just don't quite look right in practice. All right, well, get them on the field, and maybe we can, knock some sense into these guys to fully understand why I'm telling you have to do it the way I'm telling you to do it. All right, fine. Go out and do it your stupid way. See how it goes. And then they get thrown on their face, and they're like, all right, coach, what was that thing you were saying again? Holy crap. I just got body slammed. You said something about the arms, right? Okay. Run that back for me real quick, because that was freaking embarrassing. I don't want that to happen again. But the interesting thing about it, and maybe I'm completely misunderstanding the answer here, it's probably just me not fully being able to understand what pick up what he's putting down. But, if the question essentially is, why did you go so heavy defense? And that wasn't the entirety of the question, but I'm just summarizing what I feel to be the main point. And he says, yeah, in part, it's the way the board fell. So there's your foundation, your best player available. But it's also about making sure that these guys have opportunities. And the way that I could read that is our offense is full. If we draft a wide receiver, that guy's not going to play. So we could follow best player available. We can stick to the formula. But the bottom line is we just have too many guys. And it's a disservice to that player to draft them and not put them on the field. Same with tight end. We draft a tight end. He's not going to play. So there has to be it's not even necessarily in a positive sense of we need to fill that hole. It's more of a negative sense of we don't want to, unless we're just absolutely sure the value is out of control. We think that they could actually win a starting spot. If you're talking first round or something, it may differ, although it's still a similar problem of we're just kicking somebody else off, but it's somewhat more of a more positive one. But you start to get to the middle and late rounds, and you realize there's nothing here for you. It's more on that side of it of it's a wasted pick because he's never going to play for us. He might be talented enough in other situations, and he might be talented enough to play on other teams, but he's not going to play here. He is not going to beat Christian and Romeo and Jaden and Dontavian. He's not going to do it, and he's probably not going to beat some of the other guys behind that. So we need to make sure that if we draft a guy, we genuinely believe that they have the possibility of stepping foot on a football field because they need to. And if they're not going to get on the football field, then it's not worth. Now, again, I might be misunderstanding that, but I think it's an interesting thing to think. And again, I do think that best player available can be a little bit overly simplistic. I think it's mostly right, but I think you can expand the analytics on that a little bit. I think it's true that you never really know what kind of problems the futures are going to hold, but I think there's still some common sense things. There's still positional value. There's still, your roster construction. What are the odds if we draft this player that they're going to play and produce for us? Well, the player himself is part of that equation. The positional value is part of that equation, but also our roster construction is part of that equation. It's value add. This is what we looked at before. This is the amount of value that we have in total for our wide receivers. If we go out and get a guy that's Christian Watson good, it doesn't add much value. However, if we get a guy that's, let's say, Christian Watson or Romeo Doubs, or pick your favorite wide receiver, and they're that good, but they're a safety, how much value does that add? It's a lot. So I do appreciate that we're sort of not thinking in quite so rigid terms, although I certainly would rather we stick to the rigid terms than depart from them too much. But I do think that, these are things that they learn. Again, trial and error. We found out that this thing that we hated ends up being a good thing, and so we're going to push that. We're going to lean into this a little bit. We're going to try to make sure that young guys actually get on the field and grow that way. We can get more rapid growth. We can get better assessments of these guys to find out if they're ready or if they'll ever be ready. And it's exciting for us, too, because, there are situations, again, I go back to like A.J. Dillon. Dillon should have been on the field. He just wasn't because they had Jamal and they had Aaron and they just didn't want to mess with it. There's been other examples of guys that it's like, come on. They just didn't want to do it. And I think that's going to change. And you look at, for example, Marshawn Lloyd. They're going to make sure he plays. Pending or depending on, some kind of a catastrophic thing. If the player is just terrible, again, there's some common sense here. We're not just going to throw every pile of crap on the football field. But, again, there's percentages. We're not going to wait for them to be 100% ready. Let's say they have to be 65%, or whatever. They're going to struggle, but they're at that point where we feel they've crossed a threshold where we need to get them on grass and see how they respond. Anyways, why don't we take our first break, come back. We got plenty more questions and answers here from Mr. Brian Gutekunst. Compliments of Aaron Nagler and Corey Benke over at Cheesehead TV. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. What's going on, U.S. Cellular customers? I've got good news, so don't hit skip, at least not yet. I'm talking about their special customer event, Us Days. What is Us Days? It means exclusive offers just for their customers, just to say thanks. Like $1,200 off any phone, plus $300 off any tablet. No, I didn't just misread that. They must really like you. Us Days at US Cellular, exclusive offers just for you, just to say thank you. Right now, US Cellular customers get $1,200 off any phone, plus $300 off any tablet. Terms apply.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
You're a podcast listener, and this is a podcast ad. Reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Lips and Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a reproduced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience with Lips and Ads. Go to lipsandads.com now. That's LIBSYN ads.com. You're a podcast listener, and this is a podcast ad. Reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Lips and Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a reproduced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience with Lips and Ads. Go to lipsandads.com now. That's LIBSYN ads.com.
All right, so we're going to kick off round two here with a question to Brian Gutekunst about acquiring new players and his process, sort of his walk-away point. Specifically, Aaron was highlighting a lot of players that were supposedly linked to the Packers that the Packers didn't end up acquiring that went on to have kind of bad careers. So sort of what is that process that you use to determine when it's time or how you know to walk away?
Yeah, I think you certainly have to have a walk away point. I mean, we're all competitive in this business. When you get into those environments, when you're trying to acquire a player, you got to keep a level head. And I think as you go into something like that, you need to have a walk away point ahead of time. I think that serves you well. Certainly, we learned that from Ted Thompson and Ron Wolf. I think a lot of times too with the Packers, because we don't, our guys kind of keep things in house pretty well. So the agent community certainly uses us as being involved in a lot of things that we may or may not.
No.
But I do.
The hell you say?
Right. But I do think, and whenever you're looking at acquiring a player or contract negotiations, I think you got to put a lot of time and preparation into where your walk away point is, and then try to stay disciplined to that. Otherwise, I think in the heat of the competition in the moment, you can make mistakes.
So it's not necessarily earth shattering, but two major things or main things that I wanted to comment on here. First of all, it's not automatic. I think the tendency, at least for me, when hearing that is, okay, duh, right? Like anybody with half a brain cell would understand that you have to be level-headed. You can't allow like the butterflies in your tummy to dictate how excited you are about what if we had this player, it would be so crazy, and having things like walk-away points or lines in the sand that you draw. Not like me when I go car shopping and, the salesman starts talking me into it, and my budget goes from this to that to that to that, and it's like, well, technically, if we move some monies around, I could drive it, and then after a week of take a cold shower or something, and you're like, what the heck? What happened? Did he put me in a spell? I don't even want that car. It stinks. But in reality, we know that a lot of teams operate this way, especially teams that have very pushy and influential owners, right? I mean, it's not a given that everybody's going to have a level head, that you're going to have guys that, on all 32 teams that are going to say, this is my line, I'm not going over it. You're going to have people say, come on, that's the line, like, just do it. It's not that much more. Pull the frickin' trigger. I want them. I want the results today. I want a better team today. I want to sell the frickin' jerseys. Let's go. Pull the trigger. And, but Brian Gutekunst, I don't have to tell you my position on the job he's done here. I am a self-proclaimed gootlicker. I'm proud to have championed that movement. As uncomfortable as it may be, I'm going to keep it. The two things that I've come up with, Pack Daddy and Gootlicker, it's just People are going to get all kinds of wrong ideas about me, but it'd be real uncomfortable if Brian Gutekunst and I met each other. Me being a Goot daddy and him, or me being a Goot licker and him having to call me daddy. It's a whole thing, man. But no, I mean, I think we are in a good position that, listen, I mean, again, you go back to the blackjack example that I use all the time, that I think many people I've heard use the example. You can hit on a 19 and be right. It's not impossible. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes teams make bad decisions. I think the Rams, when they won the Super Bowl, were a terribly run team that made a lot of terrible decisions that hit 19 and they got a 2 and they won, But the point is, over the long haul, if you start making the right decisions, you win, not necessarily more often than not, but you win more often than the other guys. And that's ultimately what the NFL is. It's not about beating the house. It's about beating the other guys at the table. We're not playing against the NFL. We're playing against the Bears and the Lions and the Chiefs and the Dolphins and the Redskins, not the Redskins anymore, the Commanders. Just deep recesses of my mind, like, say Redskins. Come on, we haven't said it in a while. It's a good name. But again, as long as we keep making the right bets, nobody wants to stay on a 17 because you're looking at that going, I'm going to freaking lose. Like, just give me a card. But that's the right thing to do. In that situation, you can't help but play the hand you've been dealt. That's it. Make the responsible decision and stay. The other thing that stands out, and it's something we've all speculated before, but to my knowledge, have never really heard Gutekunst say. Maybe he has. He probably has. But the point that he made about sometimes we're, quote unquote, in on a player, and that's BS, where the agent is essentially using us to try to drive up the price. And my first thought would be, well, why don't you correct that? Somebody comes out and says you were interested in this bum that went on to go do nothing. It is funny because a lot of people that hate Brian Gutekunst will point to, oh yeah, he wanted this guy and he wanted that guy. And look what happened. They sucked. But you think about it, it's like, why do we never end up getting those guys? You know what I mean? It's interesting. I mean, it's not to say we've never brought in a free agent that didn't pan out, but there have been some terrible players that at one point or another were linked to the Packers. And those are the ones we always lose. It's weird. Maybe there really was no interest in a lot of these guys. But my first question to that would be, why don't they come out and clear it up? Why don't they just come out and say that's BS? Well, I think because it benefits the Packers. If the agent is just trying to drive up the price, it doesn't matter who the other team is. Screw that team. Take more money from everybody. I mean, especially if it's the Bears, the Lions, or the Vikings, for sure. But it could be the Jets. It could be the Raiders. I don't care. Make them pay more so that they have less. Make them overpay. Make them hit on 18. Just make the wrong decision, and it makes it better for us. So as much as it sucks, again, it's another one of those things where I'm sure Gutekunst would love to come out and be like, excuse me, that's BS. I never wanted that guy. He's a bum. Stop saying I wanted him. At the same time, you keep your mouth shut. Agents know they can use you like that. Maybe not every team does that. And it becomes this nice little symbiotic relationship. You use us to hurt other teams, and I'll allow you to lie and say that we're interested in players that we're not. Maybe run it by me first just to make sure, but I might give you a little nod. So anyways, the next question from, again, Aaron is essentially, the Aaron Jones thing is pretty odd. He says he's been covering this team and Gutekunst for a long time and has kind of developed an understanding of his how to read him, I guess. And he was shocked at what happened with Aaron Jones because he was so definitive. And I think that that's fair. And we've talked about that before, too, in terms of, I talk about reading the tea leaves. I'm trying to remember examples, but Aaron Jones was probably one of them where you listen to the way he talked about Bakhtiari and the way he talked about Aaron Jones, and it was night and day. And I think Aaron even says that in his question. You can hear him talk about Bakhtiari. He's like, well, or Aaron Rodgers, right? We compared Rodgers to Rodgers. How, what would it be now? 3 years ago, or I guess 2 years ago in the offseason, it was, he's our guy, no question. It's not up for debate. Then he came back the next year. We got to have some conversations, and we want to see where Aaron's at, and we got to make sure we do what's right for the team and all that. You can just tell. So essentially, what the heck happened with Aaron Jones?
Yeah, well, first of all, nothing happened. There was no, Aaron obviously is as first class as it gets, and so is his agent, Drew Rosenhaus. We have great relationships with both those guys.
By the way, there's been a lot of talk, and I've reported on it. I hate to use that word, but I've commented on it. The fact that a lot of Drew Rosenhaus guys have left the building, and you've got more Mulugeta guys coming in. Now, it's possible that relationship is soured, and Gutekunst is going to come out and say we've got a great relationship, because, of course, you want to have a good relationship. But it does seem to be the case that a lot of those guys are leaving the building, and there's a new... Could just be a coincidence. I don't know. But anyways, interesting to hear him comment on it and say, no, we love that guy. We work with him all the time. Everything's fine.
At the time, but that was my expectation, and that's kind of how I said it. I absolutely expected Aaron to be back with us. That was kind of the intention. We knew there were some things to go through and some hurdles, and as I think we went through those just became harder than expected for me. And again, I think that's the one thing we talk about all the time is the NFL landscape is kind of always changing, and as it changes, we have to adapt to it. And that's really what happened is that. The landscape changed. We weren't able to kind of come to an agreement that we thought we might be able to with Aaron. And then, quite frankly, some opportunities opened up that we didn't expect as well. And when those things happen, for me, as hard as that is emotionally when you're attached to a player like Aaron and everything he's done for the club, you got to do what's right for the Green Bay Packers. And, I've had great examples of that in my career as I worked under, Ron and Ted. And certainly I feel I owe that to the organization.
So, to me, again, could be reading this wrong. This sounds pretty obvious in terms of what happened. I think, when he made the comments, the Packers and Aaron Jones were very close to coming to an agreement. They basically had it all hammered out. Everything was agreed. And I think what happened is the Vikings entered the picture. I think the Vikings came in. I think they offered a little bit more. And it is somewhat substantial. I mean, it sounds stupid when you talk about the small numbers Aaron Jones is getting compared to some of these quarterback deals and whatnot. I mean, it's very minor. But, the $3 million to $4 million, plus there's differences in guarantees and whatnot that make it bigger than it actually seems. But the bottom line is I think they entered the equation. I think they muddied the water, and everybody is kind of back on their heels, and you got Gutekunst, who's kind of in his walk-away point. Now it's like, this is a lot. I don't know if we can restart this. I don't know if we can come to an agreement. And then on top of that, Josh Jacobs enters the equation, and you've got one of the top running backs in football. Obviously, they really like him. He's much more of a Gutekunst guy than Aaron Jones is. Not to say he doesn't like Aaron Jones, because of course he does. But in terms of the build that he prefers, when you're talking about these sort of smaller, stockier 220-plus guys, and again, Annie's 24, Annie's more durable and everything. It just, when those things happened, it really just flipped everything on its head. I think it was a very fast-moving thing. I think 1 minute, everything was set and Jones was coming back. The Vikings entered the picture. They kind of had to walk away from the table. Josh Jacobs comes in, and at that point, I think for Gutekunst, it was get a deal done with Jacobs, and as soon as they did, and probably at an easier and cheaper rate than they would have expected, they just got on the phone with Aaron Jones and them and just said, we're walking away. And what sucks about it is it's entirely possible this was a negotiating tactic, like, hey, boss, just want you to know I got an offer from another place for more money. You did? Okay. We're going to go ahead and fill your vacancy, which would in some ways, kind of explain the seeming pettiness, Although, again, it is semi-substantial, the amount more. It did feel petty for Aaron Jones to leave the Packers over that. But, again, it's possible that they would have been willing to continue the negotiations and the Packers broke it off, which, can cast the Packers in a really bad light. If you have Aaron Jones saying, I'm willing to work with you, and the Packers are like, nah, screw you, we don't want you. But that's not really the picture. The picture is we had a deal, everything was good. You backed away from the table. An opportunity presented itself. We accepted the opportunity, and at that point, we had to be done with you. Next up, Corey Benke asked the question, why would you ever draft kickers and punters? He kind of highlights how the two of them have battled about that for the 17 years that they've been covering the Packers. So it's actually, again, a very good question because it's a constant battle, and I don't know that a GM has ever really been asked this directly. So it's good to hear it from a GM.
Well, I'll say this: it always comes down to the player, right? I mean, Mason Crosby's a pretty good pick, so it always comes down to the player and whether they excel or not, whether it's worth it. I get your point, because certainly there's been a ton of great kickers that have come out of the undrafted kind of pool, and I do think more so maybe for kickers and punters, but it does take a little while to get used to kicking in the NFL, and it takes some time to get over that hurdle. You've seen a number of really good kickers come through this league that didn't make it in their first or second stop that end up, finding their way along the way. So I think there's some merit to that. At the same time, I think a lot of it ends up just coming down to your kind of expectation and your football team and how you think that particular player can help you. I'm not afraid to do it. I mean, obviously, I've drafted a snapper, a kicker, a punter, I think at least in my time. I know that, and going back in years past, we've done that before. So I just think a lot of it ends up coming down to what the board looks like at the time. And if you have them rated high enough, I think, it's well worth it. I do think, the days of Ray Guy going in the first round, I don't know if you're going to see that very often anymore. But
Janikowski, right?
Yeah. I think they're all important, particularly kickers. I mean, they score points, and that's an exceptionally important thing.
So yeah, and I probably have delved into this before. This would be another fun off-season project, but trying to really assess this because I think it's somewhat of an unfair question or observation that will look at most of the kickers and punters were undrafted free agents. What percentage of people coming into the NFL are undrafted free agents in those positions? Almost all of them. So it's completely unfair. You have entire draft classes where 1 out of, 15 end up getting drafted. So it's a 1-on-14 competition. And if we have, at the end of that, 1 kicker that was drafted that is a professional kicker and like 5 undrafted that are professional kickers, are we going to say that undrafted is the way to go? Why? You have 1/3 of the undrafted guys that were a 33% success rate compared to a 100% success rate. I'm not coming up with actual numbers. I'm just explaining a scenario in which you're just looking at the whole situation wrong. It's a very different reality, but at the end of the day, just as Brian Gutekunst said, it comes down to the player. It comes down to the value. You cannot tell me that a good kicker is not valuable. I'm sure there is a way to quantify that, but and maybe the data says usually you shouldn't draft a kicker or punter. But I mean, again, with the rigidity, I really think you need to be able to put value on guys, and you need to be able to, if the value is right, take that player. Again, you might be in situations where essentially everybody's off your board, with the exception of special teams guys. Are you going to reach beyond your board or just forfeit the rest of the draft, or should you take the kicker? You got to understand too. It's not like we're trying to decide, should we get Lucas Van Ness or a kicker? Should we get Rashawn Gary or Jordan Love or a kicker? We're talking about guys that have a very slim chance of ever making a roster because they're just really bad at the position. You're like the 43rd wide receiver to come off the board, or kicker 1. And, a generational play. Look at the Bears. They're bragging about their 4th-round pick kicker because he's one of the best in a generation, which, again, is untrue. But one of the best, sure, maybe not the best. Let's say top 5 over the last, call it generation. I don't know, was that 30 years, 20 years, whatever? Probably not true. But point is, it was a 4th-round pick. Are we devaluing kicker to that degree that if, like, the Peyton Manning of kickers comes out, it's like, don't draft him. You can find scrubs in undrafted free agency. It's fine. And again, it's a false equivalency or whatever to say, 90% of the top kickers are undrafted free agents. Therefore, all the best kickers are undrafted free agents because you're not looking at it right. What if that was out of a pool of 1,000? Again, the hit rate is a big deal. How many didn't make it is also part of the equation. So I'm not saying definitively one way or another, but what I am saying is if all you're presenting to this is, hey, most kickers are undrafted free agents, so why draft somebody? Not good enough. Next is the Jordan Love contract, and he throws in at the end, is it done already and you're just not telling us?
I wish that was the case. I mean, I'd love to have it done a couple weeks ago. That'd be great, right? Because I think the stability at quarterback, and particularly with Jordan, I think would be, it's something that's good for the organization, good for our team. I think I'm optimistic because I think both, we want Jordan here. Jordan wants to be here. And certainly there's a desire on both sides to get something done. Would love to have it done before training camp. I think that would be ideal. Whether or not that happens, we'll just kind of see how that goes. I think Russ is doing a tremendous job. His relationship with David Mulugeta and their people is really, really strong. So, these things take time and none of them go real fast. So I'm not overly concerned, but I think for all parties involved, we'd love to have it done before training camp, but we'll kind of see how that goes. But I think more importantly is the fact that, we have an opportunity here to, kind of take the quarterback position, make it very stable for us for the foreseeable future. And that's exciting.
So, I mean, right off the bat, first of all, yes, I believe him. For those that might think maybe he's not telling the truth, I do believe him when he says it's not done. There was some speculation, by myself included, that maybe there was something done. So it's good to get some clarity on that. I think the biggest thing, obviously we know that the Packers want him there, and we know that Jordan wants to be a Packer. So that part isn't necessarily surprising. I think the biggest question for me and maybe a lot of other people is how sure are the Packers? Because if they're sure that this is their guy, then yeah, they're just going to give him the big boy contract, or is it going to be kind of one of those things I talked about where it's structured in such a way where it's kind of a we'll see? It doesn't sound like this is a we'll see situation. It sounds like Gutekunst, and we've heard him say this. When you have a quarterback, you want to, it's the most important thing. You got to make sure that they stay in the building. And so there may be an impulse to want to lock this down long term, to solidify that quarterback position so that we don't have to worry about it. Which I think would be, again, great. In my opinion, like I said before, if I was doing the contract, I would structure it kind of goofy. If you were to ask me what I want the Packers to do, I would want them to lock him down for a really big long-term contract, because that means that they're really confident, which is going to give me confidence that everything we saw was 100% real. And I believe him when he says that. I mean, you're still in negotiations. I believe what he's saying, that we want him here for a long time. We want that quarterback position locked up for a long time. I mean, he made that comment, something to the effect of, not only having a quarterback, but that quarterback, Jordan. I don't think we took our second break yet, so why don't we go ahead and do that? We'll come back and rip through the last of these, starting off with Kenny Clark's contract status.
Have you ever experienced turbulence on a flight and wondered why?
And you can see all the terrain around you. You've got no issue with visibility or anything?
No, everything's PG.
Maybe you've sat on the tarmac for hours wondering why your plane isn't moving.
Well, we're outside here. They're saying the ramp is closed. They won't let us park because of Air Force One.
Listen in on the conversations between pilots and air traffic controllers on the Air Traffic Out of Control podcast.
510 Whiskey declaring an emergency. There's smoke in the cabin. I need to make a landing right now on 31 left.
We have the most interesting, wild, and funny ATC recordings you will ever hear. Check out Air Traffic Out of Control wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
So as I said, this is about Kenny Clark. Some context was thrown in, particularly at the end, about does the way David Bakhtiari's contract, the way that ended, does that kind of make you gun shy or whatever? But also just generally, Kenny Clark's contract situation.
Yeah. As far as Kenny's concerned, we'd love to keep Kenny around. We'll kind of see how all that goes as we move forward here. But, it's crazy to think that he's only 28 years old with the amount of football he's played for us. I mean, he started so young. So as it relates to your second question with the third contract, I think that plays a little bit of a part for us. It's just the fact that he's a little bit younger than most third contract guys that are. And then he's been very, very durable for us over that time. So I think that's something as we go forward here, we're gonna look to see if we can do. Again, I think it's all got to fit, and certainly Jordan's contract, getting that done and kind of knowing how that is structured and how that sits over the next few years will be important. But Kenny still playing at a very, very high level. One of our team leaders. We'd certainly like to have him around for a number.
So I cut him off a little bit early there, but you can tell the difference in tone. That's exactly what I was talking about. The difference between Jordan Love, yes, we're going to get it done. We want it. We need to make sure that he's locked up for a long time. And Kenny Clark. And the whole thing is say complimentary things, but ultimately the answer is we'll see. We think it's something we'd like to get done. We got to see how the Jordan Love contract shakes out to see how our future looks and whatnot. And he's done a good job. He's been great for us. Et cetera, et cetera. It's a giant maybe. It's we're going to make an offer. Everybody's worth something. It's not necessarily true, but everybody's got a number, and it's probably not going to be the number he wants, but we'll see. And I kind of think that's where it's at with Kenny. And there's also probably some temptation to let him ride it out and let's see how he does. Let's see how that year 28 goes. Let's see what Hafley has to say. Let's see how Slayton and Wyatt look. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to kind of see how things are progressing. We also got a couple of pretty talented guys behind him. And if they start to emerge, it becomes less appealing to give Kenny a relatively big contract, and by relatively, again, we could go through that. Today is not the best day, but I know I took a peek at it. Again, looking at percentage of cap and just trying to get some ideas of what that could possibly be. So, but we also got a pretty definitive thing. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be, but it sounds like they're not really willing to go too far with it until they see the Jordan Love contract. Then they'll have a little bit more of a, kind of saying the same things over and over again, but more of a firm foundation to be able to begin negotiations. Now that we know kind of how not only how much money we have, but how it's structured and how it's going to lay out for the future, we know that what we can offer you, what we'd be willing to offer you, and in what terms, and we can go from there. I'll tell you what, I'm going to, there's really 4 more. I'm just going to do one more, though. Brian Gutekunst gives his thoughts on the NFL draft coming to Green Bay. But here is some final thoughts from Brian Gutekunst on the NFL draft coming to Green Bay.
I think the one thing about the draft, it's funny, I've gotten a lot of questions about it. And it's so funny because I'm not going to be involved in any of that stuff with the exception of what we're doing with the picks and all that. But I think it's such a fascinating thing for the city. It's so good. And there's so many people around this building that are excited about it. And it seems like as I'm in the community, people are just really fired up, for everything that's going to be. And just really cool that Mark and his team was able to accomplish that because that's a big deal.
Very good to hear Gutekunst talk about that. And it is kind of fun because it sounds like he's more or less indifferent to it, but he's excited for everybody else, for the city, for the fans, and obviously for Mark Murphy and him being able to do that. It is very cool because it's almost sort of I'm not saying the NFL tried to do him favors, but Mark Murphy's on the way out. And so, he's been working real hard to get it here. It was kind of a cool thing for the NFL to sneak that in before he has to be replaced. It's also funny that his first perception of his role in the draft is that he doesn't have anything to do with it, when has maybe more to do with it. I don't have anything to do with it except, like who we pick and stuff. But otherwise, I'm not involved at all. Such a minor role that he'll play in the 2025 NFL draft for the Green Bay Packers. But anyways, I think I'm just going to leave it at that. It's getting late here. Could throw in a call or something, but I got to get going. Appreciate the folks over at Cheesehead TV. You guys have a good rest of your day, night, whatever. Have a good one. Bye-bye.